Welcome everyone in this special episode of the Data Playbook podcast. In this podcast, we aim to build a playbook for data leaders to be more successful in data. We do that through a series of interviews with other data leaders, data practitioners, and data experts. Today is a special podcast because we're live at Data Mesh Live here in Antwerp, June 6th, 2025. And I have two very special guests with me, Jacek and Andrew. Both of them have given a workshop yesterday around data mesh. They will be giving a talk today about data mesh. And both of them have published a book on data mesh. So I think anything you need to know about data mesh now is the moment, because I have two well-known experts here with me. Welcome. Maybe let's start, Jacek, with you. Can you introduce yourself and can you also talk a bit about how you got in touch with data mesh for the first time?
Sure. So my name is Jacek. I'm a lead architect. I'm currently consultant for a large pharma company, which is based in Switzerland. I am part of the In5 group. I'm consultant there, consulting about architecture, as enterprise architecture, data architecture, social technical architecture. So everything with architecture in the end, basically, and the data mesh, obviously. And I'm in this pharma company leading architecture in one of the big data transformations. Okay. So we're transforming their pharma R&D, so whole drug discovery, let's say, into something data meshy, because it's always not a data mesh, pure data mesh, but it's something like a data mesh. Yeah. So we're doing there. And I wrote a book, as you said, some time ago, which is Data Mesh in Action, a bit of promotion. And
why did you write a book, actually?
That's a good question. We were implementing something similar in my organization, which was basically something like a data mesh, but based on events. It was an event-driven architecture. And then suddenly Jacek and Andrew wrote the article. I read the article and it seemed so similar to what we were doing in my department. I thought that, okay, we already started implementing something like that. Let's maybe think, more about that. And we were, doing a lot of research about the topic, about some similar things to a data mesh and then decentralization. And I gathered a group of people around me that were also pretty, passionate about that. Okay. And one of the, discussions, I think during the beer was like, hey, maybe we could write a book about that. So, yeah. Cool. So then we invited also Sven, because Sven wasn't part of the team at the beginning. And we wrote together a book.
Super impressive.
And it took a lot of time, honestly. It was like 1.5 years to get there. Writing it for the first one, it was easy part, but then doing the reviews, constantly changing the text and the content was a pain.
Okay. All right. And Andrew, second guest, can you also quickly introduce yourself and how you got in contact with Data Mesh?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Andrew. I'm a principal data engineer and also an author of a book, Driving Data Quality with Data Contracts, which I wrote a couple of years ago. And I got started with Data Mesh around 5 or 6 years ago. And we had some problems where I worked. We wanted to use data for more and more important processes and also to drive products that would drive revenue. And at the time, our data wasn't really of right quality to do that. And it wasn't really reliable enough to do that. And I started thinking about how I could solve that problem. And a lot of the solutions that I found were things like, buy an observability tool. Observability tools are good, but they don't really solve the root cause of problems. So I started thinking about the root causes, and there are things like, well, in particular, the problem was that our upstream data changed very frequently. We were a fast-growing company at the time. And every time the data changed, everything downstream broke. Yeah. And that's not great for reporting, but arguably acceptable. But it's definitely not acceptable for revenue generating products we want to sell to our customers. They expect them to be up and working all the time. So I started thinking about how I could solve that root cause problem of all this data changing frequently, of data being hard to use, of not being very reliable, not being of the right quality to build upon. Even if we did have the data, it often took weeks or months to actually use it and transform it into something usable. And around this sort of time that the data mesh articles came out, as I started to think about this, and I liked them a lot, data mesh articles. They resonated a lot with me. But at the time, I was just a lead of a data platform team. And I felt like trying to argue that we should move to data mesh architecture was a bit beyond what I could do at the time. So I started thinking about a different way to approach this. I was already starting to think about the way we need more of an interface for data, which became data contracts. And I started thinking, well, maybe with data contracts, we can apply some of the principles of data mesh kind of almost by stealth. So we can start moving to a more decentralized model, start federating governance around, because around that time was when GDPR came in as well. So that's quite fresh in my mind about the trouble we had with that when it came in. Yeah. And I started thinking, well, I'm not going to try and argue for data mesh in this company, but what I'm going to do is come up with this idea around data contracts and use that to move company in that direction towards a data mesh. And we've been doing that for 5 or 6 years in production now, data contracts.
Wow.
Arguably, well, some people credit me with coining the term data contracts. I certainly wrote some of the early articles on it. And I'm still at the same company now, so I've seen it through from idea. And even now we're using it in production. We have hundreds in production data contracts. And we're still on our journey towards a data mesh. Not quite there. We'll never be there, I don't think, in terms of like to the letter data mesh. But we're on that journey and we're doing that. We're using data contracts as the foundations for that journey.
All right. So I think it's fair to say when I hear both of your journeys, you've actually been doing data meshy stuff before there was the term data mesh, right? If you're saying doing data contracts for 5-6 years and you were doing something already when the article of Zhamak got published. So you're now here, so quite a few years later at a data mesh conference. Of course, you're here to do the workshop and to give your own talk, but you also hope to get something out of the conference yourself. And what do you hope to get out of the conference? Start with you.
Yeah, so honestly, recently I was going through a bit of a burnout in my work due to corporate politics and being stuck with those political discussions. And going to such a conference for me is like charging batteries. You can spend time with people that are really passionate with what they are doing. Usually not during the presentations, but afterwards when you are meeting them at the coffee and you can discuss all those topics and you can finally have this kind of academic discussions, about data mesh and all data related things. So for me, it's about charging batteries, inspiration to go to the day job, let's say, and again have this energy to really change something. And meeting people in general.
Oh, really cool.
Yeah, similar for me. There's some great talks today, which I'm really excited to attend, but it's really meeting people like in person, which don't get opportunity to do as much these days as we used to. Yeah. And just hearing about everyone else's stories on their journey towards data mesh, almost like group therapy in a way. Like all our companies are different, all our data is different, but our problems are very similar. Yeah. And you kind of hear these problems more honestly when you're in person chatting about it, like over coffee or something. Yeah. And it's just nice to know that, it's kind of humbling, it's kind of recharging to know that we're all struggling with similar problems, we're all trying to approach it in similar ways. So we must be trying to do something right and sharing those kind of stories with each other and our learnings with each other in person. It's a nice day.
Yeah, I agree, because sometimes it's easy on LinkedIn or on Medium, on blogs or whatever. You always read the success stories. You always think the case studies at a client, and we were very successful with data mesh, and everyone high-fived each other. But we all know that the reality is sometimes a bit more difficult. I like to zoom in on a particular post. I've been following you, Andrew, for a while on LinkedIn. You had this post at some point where on the left you said, draw some circles. And on the right, it's like roll out a complete data mesh with domain-oriented data products and federated governance and stuff. It's like drawing an owl, right? So draw 2 circles and draw an owl. And that was super funny because it was very recognizable. But I wondered, and you already mentioned that you're on a journey towards data mesh, but you'll never really get there. But so for people who are a lot less experienced than you, how do you get from those 2 circles to a data mesh?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I think it's a difficult question to give a simple answer to. I think we'd like to have a one-line answer we can all follow, a one path we can follow. But I think it's very difficult because every company is different, the structure is different, the politics are different, the experience you have, the tools you have, the people you have is all very different. I think it's very hard to go from wherever you are today, and again, but it's also different where you are currently, to a sort of by the book data mesh implementation. Because Yeah, because there's just a large gap between kind of what you are today, the experience you've got, expertise you've got, and where you want to be. And when, like you said, like when you read things online, you see one company's journey, and it can be tempting to just follow that. Like, I worked for them, I'll follow that. Or a book described it, I'll follow those steps like by the letter. But it's often not that simple, or it's rarely that simple. I think that's why many organizations have struggled with data mesh. It's because they read about it, they read about the best case scenarios, the success stories, and they're like, we're going to do that. Let's have a 2-year transformation project, €20 million budget, and we're going to do data mesh. And in 2 years' time, here's data mesh, and it'll solve all our problems. But then those kind of long projects tend to be difficult to get right and succeed. And you start losing sight of the problems you're trying to solve. You start just thinking about the solution, but forgetting about the problem. You can often, if you're not doing it well, not deliver value for quite a long time. Maybe not until 2 years, at which time the project might start stalling or get cancelled. And it becomes a failed project, which I think a lot of companies have had, which is why some analysts are less keen on data mesh these days as a term. It's becoming less of a popular term because a lot of companies are struggling with it. I don't think it's data mesh's fault. I think data mesh is full of great ideas that we can all learn from and apply to our problems. But I think if you see this utopia of a perfect data mesh and you're trying to get to that, and you think you can do that overnight, or you think you can do that as one transformation project, that's going to be difficult to achieve, and that's where many people have struggled.
All right, that's very good. Yeah, I agree. And with any technique that you adopt, if you adopt it in a very dogmatic way, you say, we have to follow it in these steps and then we'll be successful, that never works. But if you take the ideas or the principles behind it and try to okay, how does this apply to our company? That makes a lot more sense. And for you, I guess that the thing that you took, well, it's not even coming from data mesh, but you zoomed in on data contracts as a means to advocate data mesh ideas, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I use data contracts to implement many of the principles of data mesh. So for example, like federated computational governance. It's a bit of a mouthful, like many terms in data mesh, but it's a great idea. If you want to move to a decentralized model, you need to think about how you're going to keep that data well governed and comply with policies and regulations and things like that. Particularly while I work and also Jacek works in regulated industries, it's very important to make sure our data is stored and managed correctly. Yeah. Particularly, even more so with more regulation coming in and more scrutiny over how personal data is being used, it's becoming more and more important for every company, really. Yep. So I wanted to move to a centralized model. I wanted to federate governance and automate governance, but I didn't say, let's do a federated computational governance program, partly because it's hard to say. I don't want to say it too often, but hard for me to say anyway. But what I did say is look, we have this decentralized model. We have these data contracts appearing everywhere. We want to make sure we are handling data correctly. We want to roll out data retention to all of this data. What we need to do that in a decentralized model is categorize data effectively. So every data can be categorized with, is it personal data or not? Is it confidential, secret, public? How do we anonymize it? What's the strategy there? And for, we've got these contracts, these data contracts, which I haven't really said what they are yet, but they are just basically human and machine readable documents that contain metadata that describes the data. And we had to have that to create what I call the interfaces for tables. But once you have this metadata, you can add more things in there that allow you to do more automation, like the governance. So we started putting more things in that data contract for categorizing data. And then it's quite easy as a data platform team, which is where I spend most of my time working, to write tooling that can apply the centralized, centrally defined data governance policies to our data, no matter where it is in the organization, no matter who owns it, no matter the shape of it. Is it wide? Is it quite nested and deep? We don't really care about that. As long as the data is described well enough, it's really quite simple to build tooling that applies the centralized policies to the data, wherever it is. Yep. So we kind of adopted this idea of federated computational governance. Hopefully that's the last time I say it. And we implemented it through data contracts. But we just said we are solving data retention, and that's the problem we're solving. Yep. And we're using these ideas to solve it.
All right, that's very cool. I'd like to switch gear a little bit. You, Jacek.
If I could add something to this one,
yeah,
this is
go for it.
Interesting topic, because I'm sure you would agree with that, but I see quite often that people treat data mesh as a goal on itself.
Okay.
Something to achieve. And because I guess it's because usually IT departments are leading the whole effort. I'm sure you see that. But for me, and I even gave the talk, on Data Mesh Belgium 2 days ago about that it's not a goal. It's simply one of the tools or simple small part of a data strategy that you should have. And the data strategy should be based on business strategy. So it's never a goal to achieve data mesh itself. The goals are from business, and you should focus on them, how to make the impact on the business. And the principles that comes with data mesh might help or not necessarily. So for me, it's usually something like I treat those principles like a sliders. So you could implement it to the fullest, or maybe not necessarily, maybe just partially, because this is what helps the business in the end. I did, and I showed that during the presentation, we did something like impact mapping. So we started from the business goals. Then we were figuring out what kind of actors are related to those business goals. And then, what kind of impacts we could make on those actors. And finally, there was something like enablers from data strategy. So one was, for example, something about master data, another one about metadata management, some piece about treat your data as a product. But in general, everything was related to the business and the goals. So for me, data mesh is just a tool. You could use it to the fullest or maybe just partially because it makes sense in the particular case. But I think this might be a reason of failures. They treat it like a goal, fancy thing to have.
Yeah, exactly.
It's nice to put on your CV that you're doing data mesh.
CV-driven development.
But maybe do you also know of cases or maybe clients or situations where you listened to the business goals, you thought about the data strategy, and you came to the conclusion that data mesh was not the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Okay. When is that? Can you give a specific example of when that happened, or?
So it wasn't a consulting gig, but I had open discussions with some folks that were from one of the company, and the company was simply quite small. Yeah. And they didn't have a, let's say, complex organization. So, and for me, usually, data mesh is the right fit when you are dealing with a complex organization and a complex domain. So it makes sense basically to decentralize because there's a lot of buckets or pockets of complex knowledge and that you cannot, gather in single team. And in this particular case, for them, it was just playing with new fancy, hype. Let's decentralize something. But, if you just don't have enough people in organization or complex domain, probably doesn't make sense in your case. For me, it makes definitely sense in a quite big organizations, in big corporations, especially like the client that I'm working with, where the domain is extremely complex. In drug discovery, you have like protein science, genomics, proteomics, all of those scientific, things, and each of them is basically a domain or multiple domains in the same time. So then you have a complexity, and you have to you cannot centralize everything.
I like that. A couple of years ago by now, I heard a talk from an architect, Matthias Lavard. I probably don't know him, but and he said the ideal data team, the perfect dream team, is 8 people who can do everything end to end for a business. So if your business is small enough that one team of 8 data experts can do everything, that is the dream. Because you do not need to build self-service infrastructure. You do not need computational governance. You can just, with the 8 of you, or you need it less maybe, with the 8 of you, you can just build the use cases, ship it, run it, talk to business, and do everything, right?
Exactly.
The reality is that the kinds of businesses that you guys work with, you can't do everything with 8 people, right? But you mentioned domains, and that's actually an interesting thing. Because in data mesh, it takes a lot of ideas from domain-driven design, but most data people I know, including myself, we don't have a background in domain-driven design, and you do, right? So I wonder, as an expert, what advice can you give data people in how to design their domains?
So what I'm usually doing, I'm trying to apply multiple heuristics at the same time. So heuristics for me is something like a rule of thumb. Usually works, sometimes doesn't. And you can treat it as lenses through which you can look at the problem from different perspectives. So, for example, the main heuristic I'm using is aligned with a business domain / business capability, because for me, those two terms are quite similar to each other. And usually, in fact, I'm using business capabilities. Another one, for example, that is quite good in my case, in case of my client, was aligned with data modality. Because, for example, genomics data and imaging data is a modality in our case. And it worked pretty well to create data domains around those, because the standards around those data modalities are should be standardized basically across the organization. Another one is, for example, aligned with value chain phases. So if you have a company that you have, proper value chain mapping done in the past, or maybe you could do that, then you could, look for those phases and basically align domains with those phases. And this is also what worked in our case, more or less, because we have clear phases of basically drug discovery. There's a preclinical part, clinical part, and you can easily decompose it this way. And the one that is most used, I referred to in the beginning, so the business domains, business capabilities, I, for example, really recommend to use all those techniques done in or created in by DD community. So event storming is a great exercise. I especially like it to do it face-to-face. Remotely, not necessarily, because at least I know this is my experience. It's a bit chaotic, especially at the beginning. I'm sure if you were part of the event storming, but usually people are randomly grouping each other into smaller groups, and it cannot be done, easily remotely. Another one, you can do it remotely, is domain storytelling, as an example.
And event storming, for those who don't know what event storming is, what does it look like? What do you do in an event storming session?
So easiest explanation is you try to write down on a sticky notes the business events. So something that already happened in the past tense, and you put it on a sticky notes, and you ask basically people in a room. You should have a good representation from all of the departments if you're doing the high level kind of event storming. And those business representatives usually are, writing down something like a business events and putting them on a wall. And it's usually a massive wall with a lot of sticky notes, like hundreds of sticky notes stick to it. And then randomly people or chaotically are starting to order those events, based on the business process that they were following. And this is a simple explanation. And then there are additional sticky notes that are representing other things, like systems, actors. But in general, the main goal is to show how the business processes are looking like in your business. And then based on those events, you could start, seeing those contexts and finding the boundaries, looking for something like a pivotal events, the most important events. Those are usually the boundary between the domains. So it's really helpful to really find out, what's there.
Can you give an example of like a pivotal event? Like what should I think of? Is like the customer signs a contract? Is that an event, or what is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually, then after such an event, the process is going to different part of the organization usually. The example you provided is good. For example, in our case, target discovered, and then you are moving to different phase of the drug discovery.
All right, cool. Andrew, switching back to you, you already talked about what it was like to roll out data mesh in an organization. I also read on one of your blogs that you don't even like to call it data mesh. I also said it. But can you share some more lessons learned about how you were successful with rolling out a data mesh?
Yeah, sure. So for us, we're a much smaller organization than where Jacek works, and we really started from a bottom-up approach. So we had specific problems we wanted to solve, like I was speaking about earlier. Wanted to make our data more reliable, wanted to improve quality, wanted to move ownership and responsibility a bit left, kind of shift left. Mm-hmm. And we started very small. We didn't get by, and we just said, okay, we in the data platform team, we can work with another team to create a proof of concept here, a POC. And we found a team to work with that wasn't producing the most critical data for the company, but they were producing important data. They were a team we could work with, have the time to work with us. They understood the problems quite well. They're quite a data-driven team anyway, so they kind of understood why we would need to improve quality of data, why that would help the company to do so. And we just worked very closely with them. And they were a software engineering team, because most of our data came from our software engineering services, and that's the data we wanted to improve. That's the most important data for us. So we worked very closely with them on the solution. And the solution was basically data contracts. So it's like how they wanted to define data contracts. We didn't want to just say, go and fill in this YAML or this Google Sheet or this web UI. It was like, well, you're software engineers. We want you to be doing this because you're going to own this. How would you like to define these data contracts? And that's why we use something a bit unusual for our data contracts. We use this language called JSONet, which is like JSON with extensions and functions. It's a bit of a weird language. I wouldn't recommend it if you don't already know it. But the reason we use that is because our software engineering teams, they use that to define all the infrastructure as code. Yeah. They use that to define all the APIs. And we wanted data contracts to be similar to APIs, but for data, we wanted to have the same tooling around it, the same lifecycle around it, the same discipline around it. And we wanted the adoption to be as easy as possible for them. I mean, we are asking them to do more work, so it is that argument, but despite that, I want to empower them and support them as best we can through the platform. So we implemented data contracts in JSONet and made it as easy as them to adopt it as we could, really focus on the developer experience for that. And because we were working so closely with this team, we were getting their feedback very quickly. They felt like they were helping design the solution, because they were, which gave them a sense of ownership over this as well. And they just became our allies, talking about why we should move to data contracts as a company. The POC was successful. We did another one, repeat and repeat. Because nothing breeds success more than success. So as you keep doing this, and eventually we had enough success, we built up more of a platform around data contracts, that the CTO and other people started to notice this as being a good idea. And then we had to buy in to really accelerate and make this a core part of our data strategy. So very much a bottom-up approach, which worked well in our organisation because of the size of the company and because of the culture we had, allowed us to do that.
So you didn't need to make big pitch decks or find budgets?
No, not initially. It's very much start small, repeat. We had the autonomy to do that in the data platform team. We could go and find these problems and work out how to solve them as best we could. So it's a good culture we had in the company to allow us to do that. And just prove the success incrementally, build it out. I mean, eventually, like I said, people start noticing the CTO, CPO, head of data, the head of data protection officer, all started to notice. And then we had loads of conversations with those people as well. A lot of it actually wasn't the technical side. There's all the communications we're having with different stakeholders, whether that's individual software engineers, whether that's product managers, and eventually people at the C-suite, having all these conversations about why we want to solve this problem. Yeah. And like Jacek was saying, because we had a company strategy that we were trying to solve for. And the strategy was to use our data to drive revenue, essentially. Yeah. And we worked back from that and said, well, our data is not good enough to do that. Let's solve that problem. So we had a link from strategy to what we were doing. And although we started small, we could always link it to that. So we didn't really get questions like why we're doing this work. And as it got bigger and successful, it just became more, which had more and more buy-in from the people who we needed it by to take it to the next levels and keep going from there.
And as you were one of the first ones, or arguably the first one to implement data contracts, there was no tooling available. So I guess you build everything in-house. If you look at the market today, is there any tooling you see in the market that you like with regards to data contracts? And are you thinking about adopting or maybe writing your own tool? So where are you in the tooling question?
Yeah, there's a lot of good data contract tooling coming out. A lot of people looking at it. A lot of people investing in it. That's really good to see. For us, we built it in-house because we have the skills to do so, and we wanted to build something very specific for people who wanted to create data contracts, which were software engineers in our case. So I think that's key. You need to design your solution for people who are creating the data contracts, not for you, the data team. And that can be a problem when buying any solution. Like your buyer might be the data team, but the users might be software engineers. And are they getting enough of a say in what the solution should be if you want them to adopt it, because otherwise they're not going to feel like they want to adopt it. They're going to feel like being told to, and people don't like being told what to do, and it's going to be difficult. But there's good tooling around these days. It's well worth looking into. But it's important to think not just about what tooling to apply, it's like how is this tooling going to work in our company self-tools we have. And that's why we built it ourselves. And to be honest, building it ourselves wasn't a huge undertaking. We were kind of like we're a software company. So we had a good infrastructure as code platform we could build upon. And we just glued things around that. And we made use of quite a lot of open source tooling. So we had a data contract, like I said, defined JS on it, but could be anything. It doesn't really matter. And we just end up writing quite a lot of glue code that converts it to a different format, say to protobuf to configure our, in our case, Google Pubs upstreams, but it could be Kafka, it doesn't really matter. Or we convert it to JSON schema, so we can use JSON schema libraries to do data validation. Yeah. Or we convert it to a different kind of YAML, so we can use like Soda Core, for example. You can do whatever you like with it. So you can make use of other tooling, not necessarily build all the tooling yourself. And hopefully more and more tooling will adopt data contracts as input, maybe a data contract standard, like the open data contract standard from Bitol, for example. And then it'll be quite easy for people to pick and choose the tooling they want to solve problems they have and to use the tooling that's best suited for their particular company and the culture they have.
And what are the elements that are essential in a data contract?
So I think every data contract should at least have the owner, because we're talking about data ownership here a lot. Yeah. And if data isn't owned, then like, why have it? Like, if it's not important enough to own, it's probably not important enough to keep. Yeah. So you would just delete it. I know ownership is a more complicated problem than that, just finding an owner, but you should really have an owner in data contract because you're trying to centralize ownership of data and therefore you need an owner. You probably want to have, or you do want to have a schema, because without the schema, you're going to struggle to create interfaces, which I think is very important for data contracts. We're trying to move away from sucking data out of databases to publishing data through an interface. So you need to have that. You need to have a version number because data evolves, so you need to be able to evolve your data contracts.
And there, if I can pick in on that, do you use versioning just like API versioning, like major, minor, and then breaking changes and stuff?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, exactly like that. And if there's a breaking change, you want some sort of migration path. If it's a minor change, you probably don't need to do that because you're not going to affect downstream consumers. So you're really encouraging regular minor changes, but discouraging breaking changes. Yeah. Because again, the problem we wanted to solve was the reliability and stability of our data, so we can build on it. It's very hard to build on something with confidence if it's changing all the time in breaking ways. Yeah. And that's what we need. And that got quite a lot of pushback, not inside my company, but from people outside the company when I started talking about data contracts. They're like, well, data's changing all the time. We need to have it change all the time. I was like, well, is that true? Like, and if it's true, how are you going to build on it if it's changed all the time in massively breaking changes?
I love it. Sorry to interrupt you. I love that you say that because you guys have been around for a while as well. I guess more than 10 years ago, one of my first big data projects was on Hadoop. And the whole premise of Hadoop, I don't know if you ever touched it, but it's like throw all data in a lake, ask questions later. Well, we laugh now, but that was really like, we were so fed up with Oracle databases and the schema had to be perfect. And then people were very frustrated actually that indeed data changes, but now I can't insert it in Oracle anymore because it breaks. And Hadoop came there to save us because you can just dump everything in the lake and ask questions later. Yeah. But that bit us in the ass so bad.
I know. Yes, I remember those days well, and I'm still scarred by them. But the problem we had there was we made writing data so cheap to read to HDFS, to data lake, and reading it so expensive. And it became so hard to use, so expensive to use, that it almost became the return on investment of using the data was so low. Yeah. Because you had to do all these Hadoop jobs, Spark jobs or whatever. They were really hard to write. It took a lot of skills to write. And by the time you actually have the data you can use, the data's changed again, you have to start again. And I think that's a massive mistake we had as an industry. And we still suffer from it now, I think. When you look at some of the tooling that we have, using things like change data capture, ELT, things like Five Transit, they're great solutions, but they're just sucking data out of APIs and not really providing data that's fit for consumption. I think we need to move away from this idea of just sucking data and chucking it into data lake, from having services publish data to us in a format that's ready to consume.
Yeah.
That's the main problem. The data was not made for consumption. So if we're building on top of the internal database via CDC, via some sort of replication process, CDC being change data capture. If we're building on top of that data to be replicated, the software engineering team needs to change that database frequently. If they are a high-performing software engineering team, they are delivering features. It shouldn't be a surprise that this data changes all the time. And yet we seem surprised when it breaks our world. And we never or rarely do we go back and think, let's solve the root cause of why are we building on this data. We just put observability, we just increase the ETL, put more coalesce statements in, more if nulls, more case statements. ETL gets more and more expensive, more complex, hard to maintain, it breaks more often. And we've been in this cycle for years, maybe decades, going back to HDFS and Hadoop. And that I think is, I've gone a bit ranty there, but that's where I think we need to.
I love it.
That's my soapbox. I think we need to move away from that. If data is important enough for us to build on and invest a lot of time building on important products, whether that's revenue-generating products, whether that's AI, whether that's key processes like fraud, whatever it might be, if it's that important to us, we need to treat it with the same discipline that we treat other systems integrations, so using things like APIs. What's the API for data? It's a data contract.
Then I wonder what your opinion is on schema evolution. And automate the schema evolution, because I see quite some teams who have changed data capture indeed from their operational databases, and indeed things break all the time, but then they very often custom made automatic schema evolution, so their data lake schema always reflects the schema of the operational system. How do you look at those?
Yeah, I mean, you can try and do that, but I think it's a losing battle, really. I think it's very complicated to get right, to hide all changes. Like if it's a minor non-breaking change, I mean, they can get away with it, but adding a new column, that's not going to impact things downstream. But at some point, the database is going to change in a more dramatic way. And how, maybe for scaling reasons, they need to scale, maybe just they need to model it, maybe they need to increase the efficiency of some joins, whatever it might be. Things that we don't really care about because we don't really want that raw data anyway. We want data that we can build upon, that uses terms that we understand, not terms that are internal to our system. So it's not just schema evolution, it's that as well. But with schema evolution, I don't think you can automate your way out of it. I think you're just working around the problem again, trying to solve it with tooling rather than trying to address the root cause and taking the harder approach, but the more resilient, reliable and future-proof approach of solving the root cause of problem and moving away from replication of data to publication of data.
Wow, you formulated that really well. No, I fully agree. I often, I can't say it as eloquently as you, but I think it's a lazy solution for engineers who don't want to talk to people. It's like, oh no, but I can hack my way around it and then it will break less. But the core problem is indeed that the source application needs to think about which data they want to publish and how they want to publish it, as you said, in a way that's easy to consume for downstream consumers, right? And that's the problem you need to solve. Whether you do that with data contracts or you just do it through Confluence pages or I don't care, but that's the problem you need to solve. Right?
Exactly, solve root cause, yeah.
All right.
It's funny for me because that problem was already solved in software engineering so much time ago, with interfaces, clear facade, and hiding the complexity of the system, not showing the internal schema of your database to external world, just hiding it behind the API. And after so many years, when we know that in software engineering, we suddenly discovered that on the data part of the industry.
Exactly. Because I've got a background in software engineering. I was a software engineer before I ended up becoming a data engineer with Hadoop and then a sort of data platform engineer, which I am now. That's what, when I was trying to think about how to solve these problems, I just thought, well, as a software engineer, I would never go to a database. I would always have an API.
Feels dirty, right?
Yeah. Exactly. And that's a no-brainer. We'd have to argue for that.
Exactly.
That's like, why is it different for data? I tried to list down all reasons why it's different. I couldn't really think of any good ones and real blocker reasons. I know there are reasons. It's hard to go and talk to people. It's hard to make this change. I know there's lots of hard reasons why we don't do this, but there's no blocking reasons. There's no technical reason why we can't do this. And data mesh is obviously very inspired by software engineering practices. Yeah. And I think we're seeing more of these software engineering practices being applied to data. Yeah. And I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, I want to take it even further. I sometimes say, if you want to know what's going to be hot in data next year, We need to look at what the software world was doing 5 or 10 years ago. That's going to be hot. Like in the data world, we seem to be running behind the software world. We're also, like now with data quality tooling coming up, all of a sudden people start to pay attention to testing. As a software, you need to test what you write. Otherwise, it's hard to debug it in production, and you're going to hurt yourself, right?
Exactly.
But that's something that, even today in the data world, there's so many pipelines written without any proper testing. It's scary sometimes because, a lot of big decisions depend on it, right? So, I fully agree that we can learn a lot from the software world. Jacek, maybe switch to a different topic. In your book, in one of the last chapters, you talk about self-service data platforms. And you give several examples, right? You give AWS, GCP, Databricks, Kafka, I think, as examples of how to build self-service data platforms. So I'm curious what your own personal favorite is. And why is it not Azure? Because Azure was not mentioned.
So honestly, no hard feelings towards Azure. I was even using it in one of my private projects some time ago when I was starting to play with serverless kind of architecture to see what's there. So no hard feelings there. I wasn't the person writing, honestly, this chapter. It was fun, I believe. I guess he didn't have experience with Azure, but I'm sure I don't recall what was the reason. But out of those platforms, honestly, I would choose Kafka, not because it's the best, but because of the sentimental reasons. I was doing a lot of development on Kafka in good old days when I was still coding. So
the happy days.
The happy days, exactly, without, endless meetings back to back and a lot of corporate politics. So just for sentimental reasons, I would choose Kafka because I did a lot of, event processing there, setting up all the topics and stuff like that. So for that reason, this one. But in general, honestly, today, I'm not so focused on the technology itself. For me, it's a very secondary problem. For example, dealing now with a data strategy, and part of a data strategy is a platform strategy. Yeah. And we've got, quite a big brownfield in the organization. There are tens of data platforms, and it's more about, applying patterns, thinking how to align across the platforms, trying to apply team topologies, for example. How to great.
Can you maybe again for the listeners who don't know team topologies, what is the book about and why do you like it?
So book is about, designing in general teams, how the teams should be set up, how the teams should collaborate between each other, how to reduce that time efficient, not efficient, collaboration and making, for example, those interactions between the teams more X as a service kind of a type of interactions. So it's clearly showing you can capture the way it is now. You could show it how it should you should do evolution for the future. So I really like that. The book is great, and we did, for example, use it for the platform group design. So we showed, how the teams owning capabilities inside the platform are exposing those capabilities to not, have a heavy kind of a collaboration between the platform teams and the data product teams. We showed also, based on that, or designed based on that relations and teams API basically between those teams. So team topologies is a really interesting one. And in general, socio-technical architecture, which team topologies is one of the way of designing it, is extremely interesting topic for me.
Yeah, you mentioned in the platform team thinking about how you expose certain functionality. I'd like to zoom in on that because I see still too many data platforms today who are basically just a bag of tools. Right, so this a data platform is on AWS, or so it's S3 with Glue, with Athena, with an EMR cluster, with this. And if you want to do anything on the platform, you basically need to be an AWS Pro architect. And you need to be like a Docker container expert and stuff like that. So when you're designing a platform strategy, you mentioned that. How are you dealing with that? Are you hiding the technologies? Are you simplifying the technologies? Are you building an interface on top of your platform, or what do you do with that?
So for me, honestly, the book that is guidance for me how to do that. I'm not sure if you heard, Gregor Hopp wrote a book about platform strategy in general, and for me it's like one of the best books about the topic I ever read. And
he was here, do you know?
Oh, really?
Yeah, he did a workship here a couple of days ago. Yeah,
oh my God.
I didn't attend, but some other people did.
I would if I didn't know.
No, it's a great book. Yeah. What is the book about?
It's in general how to design the platforms. He has the really nice picture of the platform, and he's showing that you are building diverse solutions on top of the simplified interface, and you're trying to hide the complexity of technology behind that interface. So you're basically putting some constraints on people, but those constraints are enabling. It's giving you enough freedom to innovate, but hiding this technical complexity underneath. So for me, it's a lot about, when designing a platform, a lot about developer experience. So I started from software engineering. Again, I guess this is very similar. We are now taking those ideas of developer experience and internal developer platforms to the data world. And I guess this was one of the reasons why Zhamak probably was thinking about this data platform kind of approach to increase that developer experience of the data products. So for me, also about experience. So Simple Wiki could be a platform for you that would give you a step-by-step, instruction how to do a platform. And I think Matthew Skelton from Team Topologies even coined the term finest viable platform.
Yeah.
So I think he gave an example of the wiki that could be your first idea of the platform, that you just are mentioning the tools, how to together glue them, basically, how to use them, and step by step it's that platform.
I see you nodding, Andrew, so I guess you're doing something similar.
Yeah, very similar, inspired from the same books. I can give you an example as well. So we built our platform around data contracts, and people define a data contract, and without doing anything, they get, for example, data retention, data handling, they get backups of their data. They can configure it if they like, but they don't need to normally. They just get this by default. And they don't really care how this is implemented. They don't care about how we do backups. They don't care how we do data retention. They don't care about GDPR regulation and when we have to delete data. They just categorize their data, and all that, to take another term from Team Topology, that cognitive load is taken away from them. Yeah. So they can focus on owning the data, managing data, talking to their stakeholders, talking to their consumers. They don't need to know that behind the scenes we are using Kubernetes to run some tooling for them that run the data quality checks every day for them, or to monitor and report on the SLOs and send them alerts. They just know that they'll get an alert if they start breaching their SLO for timeliness, for example. It's really inspired by the sort of platform engineering ideas that I mentioned, those kind of books really focus on the developer experience. Because like I said earlier, you have to, if you're trying to get these software engineers to take on more responsibility, you have to give them something to help them. You can't just say, you're now responsible for this data. We're like, okay, well, I don't want to become an expert in GDPR. I don't want to become a data steward. I don't know. What do I do with this responsibility? You say, okay, we don't even say we're giving you responsibility as such. We say, obviously your data, you own it. Here's all the tooling you can use to support it. It's as easy as possible. Sure. And you may even like using this tooling. It's actually the easiest way to move data around by using our tooling. And now where I work, we don't just use our tooling to get data into our data warehouse. All our data movement is through this tooling, or asynchronous data movement is through this tooling. So between software engineering teams, it's through there. And our head of systems architecture, technical architecture, in the technical architecture document he writes is saying we use data contracts to move data around between systems and also to data platform, to the data teams as well. It's just how we do data now. Yeah. And the reason why is not because I was great at selling this and really great at telling people to take ownership. It's partly the talking, but it's also the developer experience and really focusing on that as well.
Yeah, super cool. Wow. That's coming back to your book. You also mentioned about building an MVP data mesh in a month. It contrasts a bit with what Andrew said. It takes him years to build a data mesh and he will never be there. So what is the secret you know that we don't know that you can do it in a month?
So for me, it's more about way of thinking, and that should be applied to such a transformation. For me, it's always funny because usually such a data transformations are done like a big bang. Let's implement a boil ocean, implement everything in the same time, release like 100 data capabilities, and there's a failure afterwards. And it's funny for me because in IT, in general, in software engineering, we know for years that iterative, agile approach simply works, and you have to do it iteratively with small incremental steps, providing value. And usual IT products are, worth like 1 million of investments, or maybe slightly less, slightly more. But for some reason, we can do it iteratively for those small IT projects. But when we have data transformation that could worth 100 million of euros, we think Big Bang is the right choice there. Yeah? So for me, it's a way of thinking. So to do it iteratively. So as an example, that just before, you can have a data platform, or the platform that is simple wiki page, and you can easily do it within a month. So you are just trying to provide the developer experience to the data product teams by providing clear guideline. These are the tools that we recommend. You can, for example, create technology radar, so that people know which technologies in your organization they shouldn't use. For example, you're moving away from Oracle, so you're putting it in the on-hold circle, and you are showing, as an example, I'm not saying that Oracle is bad.
It's a good example.
Let's say,
Hypothetically speaking.
Hypothetically, exactly. But yeah, so these are quite easy things you can do quite quickly, and already gain something. And already you can, apply a bit of those principles in your organization quite quickly in small steps, and you probably will see some value afterwards. Yeah,
because if I link that to the story you told earlier, where you work at a very large organization, they already had 10 data platforms. If you come up with your data mesh MVP, don't you get pushback like, we don't need an 11th data platform? And how do you deal with it? Is it your plan to decommission the other 10, and the 11th will be the right one? Or how do you see that evolution?
So in such a big company with a brownfield, basically it's impossible to replace already existing technology stack with the new shiny platform. There's a lot of reasons to that, corporate politics, and people are used to work on some specific platforms. Some of the platforms were built for the reason, because the domain is very specific and it requires, for example, specific platform, like working on genomics data as an example. Yeah. So you cannot just come and say, okay, now new shiny platform will be better than everything that you work in the last 40 years. Probably it will be simply a mistake. So what you are trying to do, you're trying to standardize a bit. You are trying to at least, provide the similar experience for the people using the platform. So apply a bit of this developer experience, some proper data, a product kind of a life cycle, how it should be. You can also provide, enabling teams. Like we have some concept of domain enabling team, the team that is going to the specific domain that is established. They have materials, they have series of workshops that they can use in a domain. For example, data mesh canvas to design the right boundaries of the data products. Then they can jump to data product canvas to design the internal, let's say data product, the definition, the contract. Yeah. So, yeah.
All right. Cool. I'd like to wrap up with a question for each. It's a question I always ask people joining the podcast. What is one thing that you know now that you didn't know when you started on your data mesh, data contracts journey? Maybe Andrew, let's start with you.
I think it's a really good question. I think it's the importance of being able to communicate well and communicate with different audiences using different terms that they will understand to try and sell the vision that you're trying to sell. I think that's the one thing I kind of knew it's important, but it's one thing that I realise is critical to make any sort of change in the organisation, any sort of change in the culture, in how you do things, how you do data, whether you're going data mesh, data contracts or something else. I think that's the most important thing. It's taken me a while to learn it. I had some good support. I had a really good product manager. She helped me a lot. But yeah, the criticality of effective communication is so important.
Okay. Okay.
For me, I think it was importance of strategies. So the business strategy and data strategy. I wrote in a book, the chapter about domain ownership and how to design the domains. But honestly, I didn't understand how much it is important, in actual implementation, that you have to connect all parts of this data transformation, like data mesh or data architecture, with basically a business strategy, their goals, what kind of impact do you want to have on the business goals, and also the idea of that the data strategy is something much broader than just the data mesh. People tend to think that data mesh it's data strategy on its own, but it's not. You have to think about much more things. And when I'm doing those things right now, I understand that it's something much bigger than the data mesh. And data mesh became, for me at least, just one tool of the toolbox that I have. So yeah. I didn't know that when I was writing the book, that business is so important, in for so many reasons when you try to implement it.
Yeah, it's cliche, but it's very true. All right. I'd like to thank both of you for coming on the podcast. I wish you the best with your talks this afternoon and with the books as well. So for people who haven't read the book yet, order it. It's probably on Amazon or something. You'll find it online. We'll put a link in the description for sure. And thank you very much for coming.